Thank you for joining today. We can get started now. So, what I would love for you to do to start with is to introduce yourself in the chat if you're open to it. And what we're talking about today is a really powerful topic. It's using thought exchange in the classroom. And so, really, we're going to be talking about engaging student voice and how you can hear the most from those students in your district and in your school site. Before we start, I want to invite you, as always, to join the conversation on social media. So these are our two hashtags, hashtag TEVE and hashtag TE Masterclass. As I mentioned, there's also a chat function in Zoom. If you're going to use that to ask any questions during the presentation, please make sure that you change the topic to all attendees instead of just all panelists. That way everyone can see your question. Perfect. So who am I? Let me introduce myself as the host of this masterclass. So my name is Tila, and I'm a customer success manager here at ThoughtExchange. I work with thought partners, specifically districts in education, to help them plan and execute on exchanges, a lot of them involving student voice. So I have a lot of experience in this. And then the other thing that I do here at ThoughtExchange is to run this masterclass and our Getting Started workshop series. My objective is really to show you how you can really easily plan an exchange based on your objectives, how to maximize your participant interest and participation, and then how to work with your results in a really easy, practical, and actionable way. So these are the three things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about student voice. So what is it? Why do we want to gather it? What are some use case or examples of when we would do that? We'll talk a little bit about moderation, and then we're going to talk about promoting for students, and we'll have a quick Q&A at the end for those that have any questions. So let's hop right in and talk about student voice and student exchanges. So we all know that ThoughtExchange is an online platform to have difficult conversations with small or large groups of people, and it's really powerful and really resonates with students for a couple of reasons. So first, students aren't always invited to participate in conversations about the district and about decisions. So things like strategic planning, school policies, etc., they might not always have student voice included in the decision making just because it might be more budgetary, etc. And inviting the students in helps to build that culture of inclusivity and really triggers some buy-in because your students have given you the feedback of what they want. You know that you're going in the right direction. And then for students, running an exchange on a difficult or a complex topic gives the students the opportunity to reflect on the question before sharing and to consider others before reacting. And moving to that space of consider, reflecting, and then building that empathy, it kind of changes the conversation and has it be a little bit more mindful when you're thinking about it being more of a difficult or complex topic. And I really theorize that reflection and this act of participant learning, participant empathy, helps students to feel braver when they speak up in class about the conversation. Another thing that's great about student exchanges is that exchanges are entirely anonymous, meaning that students don't know who shared the thought that they're rating. And this has two really big benefits. First, it invites all voices into the conversation, and it bypasses the introvert or extrovert bias that you might experience in the classroom. You move the conversation from loud, so who are those same people that raise their hands every time, to crowd, who are those quieter people that don't always raise their hands? And it starts to build equality and trust. And then the other thing that it does is that it levels the playing field for any social politics that students are managing or experiencing. Because the thoughts rise to the top based on the star rating rather than based on knowing who shared it, it allows kind of a leveling or an equality to happen as well. And it can be a really powerful moment for students to see their thought rise to the top. That can be great learning. And it can be a really powerful moment for students to see their thought rise to the bottom or even be mid-rated. That can also be a really powerful learning moment. Another really big benefit for you is that it can help you build programs and activities based on what students really want or need. And I want to give you a really concrete example of that. A really strong example of that could be a portrait of a graduate exchange. So portraits of graduates aim to uncover what's most important to students to set them up for success post-graduation. And having a really direct conversation with your students about that helps you decide that in a really strong, powerful way. And so I'm going to give you 2 question prompts that could work really well for Portrait of a Graduate Exchanges. The first is, what interpersonal and employability skills do our graduates need to be ready for the challenges of the 21st century life, work, and citizenship? And what I love about that one, and the reason that I wanted to bring it to you, was it's thinking beyond just what skills do we need, it's what interpersonal skills do they need as well. And it's really acknowledging kind of the framing of what's different now based on 2020. And then the second question is, given the global trends for the future, what are the most important skills and attributes you feel are needed to be successful after graduation? And that's another really direct way of asking a similar question. And then one other tip that I have for you for considering running student exchanges is that you want to consider what ages that you're involving and reading comprehension. So we recommend having exchanges with students no younger than 5th grade, considering reading comprehension and working with the product. And then amongst that, and when you're deciding how to divide your conversations up, consider the reading comprehension of a 5th grader versus a 12th grader, or consider what's happening at different site levels. If you're asking people about safety in their school and you're asking across the district, you might want to have the conversations be school site specific. That way, when students say, I don't feel safe in the hallway, you know which hallway they're talking about because you know which school site that they're from. Perfect. So let's talk about the 3 really types of student exchanges. The first is a kind of microcosm of an exchange. It's a classroom exchange. So you just taught something, you taught a lesson, and you want to have an exchange to follow up and really cement the learning. And those are really easy to run for teachers. They empower a really active engagement in learning and support broader involvement in sensitive and challenging classroom discussions. So a good example of that could be providing a platform for assisting with senior capstone projects research. Maybe all of your seniors are doing a research project and you want to have, at the end of their presentation, the class can have a Q&A. So what are your questions about Tila's presentation today? And then the presenter can spend about 5 minutes talking through the top thoughts. Another example could be using it in a classroom to follow up on a lesson. So maybe your students just read a chapter of a book, or you taught them about a challenging history or cultural topic. You can have an exchange with them, asking them to share their insights into what they just learned to cement that learning. And then by rating the thoughts of others, beyond just sharing their thoughts, they're learning even further and considering and being really empathetic about how the other people in the classroom are learning too. So a good question example for this could be, after reading about this chapter, what are your thoughts or questions about how we view this topic in our school and society? And you can imagine kind of the answers that you would get from that and the discussion that you could lead based on those results. So next I want to talk to you about school-wide conversations. So these are conversations not just in the classroom, but in the entire school itself. And they can help your site have a conversation about a specific issue that you're facing. And what I want to say about this is that we're talking about students, but if you're thinking about a school-wide conversation, you might want to engage students, staff, admin, have everyone in the school participate and use survey questions to break out who was who. And so what are some ideas of great school-wide exchanges? Could be topics about supporting a culture of respect and inclusion. So asking people, what are some important things we could do to make our school feel more welcoming? Could be a really broad engagement to inform school decisions about things like programming, extracurricular activities, something like what would improve your learning experience at school, or what extracurricular activities mean the most to you? What do you want to see in the future? Another thing that you can do is student event planning. Things like homecoming, things like graduation. Students want to have a say in what happens there. So this is allowing students to be empowered and supported to collaboratively plan activities. Spirit days, we already mentioned, homecoming, graduation. And a good question for this is, what are some things you would like us to think about when planning our graduation activities? And that way you're kind of crowdsourcing what would make people the happiest and what would make people most excited to go to that activity. And then the last one that I'll offer for school-wide conversations is leadership development. And a lot of sites do leadership development with their students. You might have a leadership student committee, student voice, student team, etc., and building ownership and leadership in the students. So exchanges related to planning student Senate projects, providing social or emotional support for your peers can be a really valuable way to integrate exchanges and integrate conversation into that leadership itself. And so a question that I'm going to offer you is, what are some important things we can do together to support the well-being of yourself and other students at school? And that's a really powerful one. It's what can we do together, leveling the playing field again. It's not saying what can administration do, what can your teachers do, what can you do? It's really building that community sense. And then the last area where you can involve students is in district-wide conversations, large policy planning conversations. And for you as the leader, your objective with district policy or district-wide exchanges is to hear from as many voices as possible. You want as many types of stakeholders participating so that your ultimate data set is really reliable and represents demographics from each of your stakeholders. And involving students makes that data set even more reliable because you're hearing from a voice that isn't always heard in those conversations. And it helps you build any policies that come out of that exchange in a way that is student focused and centered around impact that students actually want to receive. And that can be really exciting for other people participating in the exchange. Imagine what it can be like for staff and parents who are used to having conversations like this just with each other, to suddenly have students in the mix and to be hearing new things, new fresh perspectives. Students are really on the day-to-day. They're on the ground in the school. They're thinking about things like cleanliness, like Wi-Fi, like lunch menus. And parents are really thinking about things like a little bigger picture. So learning outcomes, budget, curriculum. And when those two things mix together in a conversation, there's a ton of learning that can happen. But when you're doing a district-wide conversation, it is good to consider how the students will be talking with everyone else. So consider that student language skills can be at a different level of adults, so certain ideas might get lost in translation when the two groups are part of one exchange. So you could think about using participant grouping to separate them out. But I do want to challenge you as well that exposing parents to thoughts shared by students and vice versa can add a degree of real richness. It can give a lot of participant learning, which is a big goal of your exchanges that might be missing. So it's up to you as a leader to think about what's the topic, who are we engaging? Do we want to have one broad conversation with everyone? Or do we want to use participant grouping to have students talking with students, parents with parents, and staff with staff? And if you're unsure of that and how to make that decision based on your objectives, reach out to us here at ThoughtExchange and we can help guide you with that. And so here are some examples of really strong district-wide conversations. So we see a lot of culture and climate exchanges, kind of that example that we offered earlier. Safety or wellness exchanges. How are you feeling about wellness in the school? And then also strategic planning is one that we see happen all the time. You're thinking about your mission and your vision and you want to involve students in it. Or you're deciding about funding for the next 5 years. What are those programs that you want to focus on? What are those areas that you need to focus on and develop? And how will hearing from students impact that? And then also funding-based planning exchanges, things like LCAP exchanges or strategic plans. Perfect. So the next thing to talk about is moderation, which is really important when you're thinking about student exchanges. And your moderation objective is to keep the conversation focused and on topic and to ensure that nothing rude or harmful is being shared. And so what I'm going to do today is actually hop into the product itself and show you a little bit about moderation and kind of what options are there for you. So here we are in a sample exchange, and I'm going to click on Edit, and then I'm going to click on Moderation. And here we have 3 options for controlling the moderation of a student exchange. The first is participant moderation, hide reported thoughts until reviewed. So in each exchange, participants can flag thoughts that they think are off topic or inappropriate, and this is deciding what happens when that thought is flagged. So if I turn this on, then the thought is flagged and it's removed from the conversation until you as the leader can report it. I always recommend doing that for student exchanges. We'll do that here as well for our machine moderation. So With all student exchanges, I would recommend using machine moderation. Machine moderation allows the software to automatically review thoughts before they're visible to participants, and it reports those thoughts that are rude or hurtful that may identify an individual, so it looks for proper nouns. And what you can do is turn this on here. So just click on the on button, and now the script is going to run in the background, and every single exchange is going to get machine moderated. And I also want to always recommend that you turn on hide reported thoughts until reviewed when using machine moderation. What these two do together in tandem is to flag the thoughts and hide the inappropriate ones until you're able to review them and decide if you want to add them back to the conversation. So the other thing to consider too when you're having a student exchange is to really frame the conversation with how important that it is to keep things on topic. You can include that in your introduction messaging, and also having teachers explain that when they're introducing the exchange in the classroom, which we'll talk about next. Emphasize that this is the student's opportunity to participate in a conversation that they may not have always been invited to participate in. And so it's up to them to keep things focused and on topic. There's value in participating mindfully. And the more that you can promote and motivate intentional and thoughtful participation, the less moderation that you'll have to do. And another thing that I'll say is that the moderation decisions for student exchanges can be a little bit tricky. And so always feel free to reach out to your ThoughtExchange contact and let them know that you're going to be running a student exchange, and ask them if they have any tips or tricks for you. Perfect. So that's moderation. Let's hop back into our presentation and talk a little bit more about having teachers support. And so when you're thinking about running student exchanges, the biggest advice that I can give you to keep things really focused and on topic is to have facilitated classroom sessions. And what these mean are that you have a teacher or a leader spend about 15 to 20 minutes in class guiding students through the exchange. It takes about, as I just mentioned, 15 to 20 minutes, so not a ton of time, and it'll help you guarantee participation. So you're going to see wider participation if you do the facilitated in-class sessions, because you're blocking off time for the students. You can invite them to participate either by a code, like as you would, either by the link, as you would any other exchange, so email invitations, or you can use one of those join slides and have the 9-digit code and invite people in through there. And when you're thinking about hosting that session, we have some really strong best practices about how to actually structure those 15 to 20 minutes. The first is to introduce the exchange, and if you've created an introduction video, to watch it together as a classroom. So this is the exchange. We are doing a health and wellness exchange because we want to hear from you students what we can do together to be healthier, and then to play the introduction video. So you could frame it as, this is an introduction video that our site leader, our principal created, or maybe even students created because students are leading this exchange. Once you watch the video together and talk through what the exchange is about, it's good to give students an outline of what the exchange actually is. So the participation has 3 steps. It's the share step. You'll share the thoughts to each open-ended question. And then the star step. You're going to read the thoughts of others and rate the thoughts on a scale of 1 to 5 based on how much you agree with them. And then you're going to discover, and we'll read through this together to learn what matters to the group through the process. The thoughts that are being rated high are going to rise up to the top. And it's really important to guide your students through the process. So make sure that they understand each of the questions that they're being asked, and also have the teacher in the exchange with the students, flagging through thoughts and keeping an eye on the conversation to make sure that it's focused and there's nothing inappropriate being shared. If you're thinking about timing, you want to give them about 10 to 12 minutes to actually share their thoughts and rate the thoughts of others. And about halfway through, the teachers can announce that if the students have not yet gone to the star step, please do so now. And ideally, each student should rate about 20 to 30 thoughts. If you're in a smaller group doing one of those classroom exchanges with less thoughts, maybe you're in a group of 15 and everyone's just shared one, just ask everyone to rate all of the thoughts in the exchange. And then the really exciting thing is to lead a discussion with students based on what came up in the exchange. So if we were doing that health and wellness example that we mentioned to frame this activity here, it could be, what are the healthy things that stood out for you? or how do you want to implement this? How do you see this happening? It can lead to a really engaging and exciting conversation. So it's not just that the conversation is happening in the exchange, it's extending beyond it and impacting learning and impacting empathy. So a couple other things that I want you to consider when you're thinking about engaging students is a really great way to get students excited and to promote it is to have active peer groups motivate other students. So if you have a student council or if you have student clubs, get them to promote, spend time in their council meetings participating. Gathering student voice is all about empowering the students to feel like this is for me. I'm sharing this because it's for me and it's going to impact other students. And then the last thing that I'll plug is that having a video can be a really powerful way to get students excited about it. Students respond really well to videos. This could be as simple as you recording a video from your desk. Maybe I just hit record right now and say, thank you so much for attending today. This is an exchange that we're going to run as a result. We want to hear from all of the students, and this is the topic that we're going to cover. Or maybe it's a little bit more produced. If you have a video production program at your school, you could bring in the instructor and the students to create an even more engaging video. Perfect. So let's actually watch one of those videos together. We're going to spend a minute doing this. I thought it could be a really exciting way for you to see a great example of what a good student voice will look like. So this is from one of our district partners, Wolf Creek Public Schools. Click on play here.
Students, my name is Jason Lovell. I'm the superintendent for Wolf Creek Public Schools. I want to have a conversation. I want to talk. When was the last time you were asked? Your education, how's it going? What's working well? And what can we do even better? You've spent basically your entire life in school. Who knows better than you what works and what doesn't? Do you want to learn computer programming or to play the guitar, but your school doesn't offer that program? Or do you have an English teacher that's doing something that works really, really well for you? We want to hear about it, so it's time to speak up. Is this thing on? You have ideas, you have perspectives, and we want to hear them. So we're asking you, yes you, to help shape the future of education. Click the link for the survey, and let's hear your student voice.
Amazing. Well, I hope that that gave you an idea of how simple and straightforward the introduction videos can be. You got a sense that it was really short. It was about 60 seconds. It used really inclusive language. It used, we want to hear from you. What do you want? What would make the most meaning to you? And it also emphasized the action that they'll take as a result of the exchange. And that's something that you want to consider too in your own communications with students about student exchanges. How can you communicate to them afterwards, thinking about these are the results that came up and this is the action that we're going to take? So doing something like a summary report can be a really powerful way to do that. Perfect. So what we're going to do now is actually hop into a Q&A exchange. There's not that many of us on the call today. So if everyone can take the time to share one thought and to also rate the thoughts of others. If you need to hop off now, feel free. And if not, we'll stay and do this exchange together. Perfect. So I've just popped the exchange link in the chat. There's also a QR code and a join code if you'd like to join on mobile too. And what I'm going to do is be quiet and give everyone a couple minutes to participate. Thanks. Looks like we have some great thoughts rolling through here. Just going to hit on refresh. So if you are on the call and you haven't seen a Discover dashboard yet, this is your toolkit for working with results, and we're looking at the top thoughts. So every time I click on refresh, I'm seeing an updated list based on the star score. So the highest rated thoughts are at the top, the lowest at the bottom, and we are going to talk through all of these thoughts together. Perfect. So let's actually kind of quit starring now and hop back into the exchange. Note that we are running a little bit short on time, so if you need to leave right at 10:30, what I'm going to do is answer all of the questions with a leader report. So I'll use this comments feature to respond to them, but I'll talk through some of them right now too. So the first top thought is that it requires that action is taken. Students are sometimes cynical because they were asked for their opinions and then see no action, and that's really true. And so that's something to consider when you're planning your exchange is if you're going to ask for this feedback, Do you really plan on using it? And how can you be really vocal with students about how that change happened? And that could be something that you start thinking about building an exchange series about. So maybe you run a portrait of a graduate exchange, and a big topic that comes up is that students need more life skills programming. And so the next year you implement a class about how to do taxes, how to manage a budget. What you could do is you could have an exchange about that class, saying, we created this class because of a feedback from last year's exchange. What are your thoughts and questions, or how has this class impacted you? And that way you're showing a continuous sequence of engagement, and you're showing that there's change happening because of it. So the next question, how do you ensure engagement across the classroom or school or district? What steps can you take to improve engagement? That's such a good question, and there's kind of 3 tips within that. So within the classroom, having the teacher facilitating sessions is a physical opportunity to be walking around the room and helping guide people to participate. It's that accountability piece. The teacher's in the room with you, they're asking you to participate, and they can help you get into the exchange. In the school and the district, having the facilitated sessions is how you leverage that physicality of facilitated sessions with the overarching larger district. Another thing that you can do is if you use participant groups or survey questions to break out the site level, you can figure out which groups or sites are participating. So on the overview page, we can see a breakdown of survey questions and how many people participate in each. Imagine that I'm a school district and I have 10 schools. I list all 10 and people choose which school they're associated with. I could look at the overview page and see, okay, my high schools have 50 people participating, but my middle schools are at 0. So then I would reach out to that middle school principal and say, hey, I've noticed that there's no participation in the exchange yet. Here's the link. Do you mind getting people on this, or do you mind supporting with this too? Next thought here is seems like an awesome opportunity for input. I agree. It's an opportunity to think about it on a class level, school level, and district level too. So input on a multifaceted levels. How detailed does the summary need to be if everything is being done on the same day? The most impactful and meaningful experience for students. Yeah, so I'm guessing by summary that you may mean introduction there. And so if you are having a live in the room one like today, you may not need to write an introduction if you're going to verbally introduce it. And so notice that when you participated in that exchange, I didn't write an introduction because I said, now we're going to participate in exchange for your thoughts and questions. So I verbally framed it. If you're doing an assembly or an in-class presentation, that could be another thing to consider too. How many teachers can run exchanges at the same time? Great question. And that would be something to reach out to your ThoughtExchange account manager or client success manager about, and they can support you in that decision at your school. They can also help you get set up with any training or onboarding that you need. What would be the topic that generated the highest level of participation for students? That's such a good question. In my own experience of exchanges that I've worked on, really those health and wellness ones, very hot topics, portrait of a graduate, or any hot topic issue that's really prevalent for students. So maybe it's something safety related. Maybe it's something culture related. It really depends what's coming up for your students and what are they talking about that you're not hearing. How can you move that conversation onto ThoughtExchange so that you can be a part of it too? Next one here, how can students initiate and advocate for fundraising to purchase ThoughtExchange? It opens up an audience. That is a great question. How can students initiate and advocate for fundraising to purchase ThoughtExchange? Yeah, I would reach out to your sales contact at ThoughtExchange and consider how you could start to build a bit of a campaign around that. If student voice is really strong and harnessing it using ThoughtExchange is powerful, that could be a way for you to demonstrate ROI in order to get the funding to purchase ThoughtExchange. What is an ideal participation percentage for high school students? That's a great question, and it really depends on how you're engaging them. So if you're doing the facilitated in-classroom sessions, you can expect a higher participation rate because you have that accountability of someone in the room with them. If you're just sending out a link via email, you might see a lower participation rate unless you really incentivize that participation or it's about some very hot topic issue that people want to talk about. And so what I would recommend is for your first couple exchanges that you do with students, make a note of what your participation level is like and what communications that you did in order to promote them. And then start to use that as a baseline and do some A/B testing. So maybe your first one, you just send out an email to everyone. You sent out one email, 2 reminder messages, you have 5% participation. That's not ideal. So for your second one, you could think about, okay, how can we get a little bit more strategic about this? Maybe we want to do an email, but also post on social media, or do an email and also announce in the daily announcements, and also do a facilitated in-class session. Maybe that boosts you up to 50% participation or even higher too. It's going to be different for every school depending on what their engagement strategies have been like before, and also based on the topic too. So the last one here is, do you have teachers who drill down to content and use ThoughtExchange as an exit ticket or use for the hook of a lesson? Absolutely. So that was that classroom support example that we gave. So imagine that you want people to share key insights about a lesson. You could ask them, what are your key takeaways from today's lesson on X topic? Or what questions do you still have about this topic that we learned about today? Key takeaways helps them leave with a sense of, these are the 5 most important things that came up according to everyone in the room. And the key questions would be an ability for you to, at the start of the next lesson, to address those questions that came up and really cement and make that learning concrete. Perfect. So we zipped through all of those. As I mentioned, I will be using the leader comments and sending out everyone a report. And I do really want to thank you again for taking the time, especially those 5 extra bonus minutes at the end to attend today and learn with us. I will mention that masterclasses are every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Next week, we're talking about theming. So how to work with your results and create buckets, create actionable items. And then if you want a refresher on ThoughtExchange or to learn how to set up exchanges, we do have a Getting Started workshop tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., which is a crash course on exchange design. So thanks again for joining, everyone.